Michael Chen had lived in the old Victorian house for 3 years without incident. The building stood at the end of Maple Street, its weathered brick facade and tall windows giving it a dignified appearance despite decades of neglect. He'd bought it cheap at an estate sale, viewing the peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards as character rather than problems. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway, had died without family, leaving behind a house full of memories and dust. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when Michael first heard the sound. He'd been reading in his study, a converted bedroom on the second floor, when a faint scraping noise drifted down from above. At first, he dismissed it as branches against the roof. The maple tree outside had grown wild over the years, its limbs reaching toward the house like grasping fingers. But then the sound came again, deliberate and rhythmic, followed by what might have been a muffled sob. Michael set down his book, his heart quickening. The loft access was in the hallway ceiling, a simple pull-down ladder he'd never bothered to use. The real estate agent had mentioned the space was empty, just rafters and insulation, nothing worth investigating. He'd taken her word for it, never questioning why a house this old would have such unused space. The sound continued, soft but persistent. Michael stood in the hallway, staring up at the white square in the ceiling. His rational mind offered explanations: raccoons, settling wood, wind through gaps in the roof. But something about the rhythm felt human, intentional. He'd heard enough true crime podcasts to know that impossible things sometimes turned out to be true. People lived in walls, in crawl spaces, in forgotten corners of homes. It happened. He retrieved the pole from the hall closet, the one designed to hook into the latch and pull the ladder down. His hands trembled slightly as he extended it upward. The metal tip caught the ring, and with a gentle tug, the hatch door swung open. The ladder unfolded in segments, its hinges groaning from disuse. Dust rained down, making him cough. A smell wafted from the opening, stale air mixed with something else. Perfume, maybe, or laundry detergent. Something distinctly not dust and decay. Michael's pulse hammered in his ears as he placed his foot on the first rung. The ladder held firm despite its age. He climbed slowly, each step bringing him closer to the darkness above. When his head cleared the opening, he fumbled for his phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating pink fiberglass insulation and exposed wooden beams. He swept the light across the space, seeing nothing at first. Then movement in the far corner caught his eye. A figure hunched against the wall, knees drawn up, face hidden. "Please don't call the police," a woman's voice whispered, cracking with emotion. "Please, I'll leave. Just don't call them." Michael froze halfway through the opening, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The woman looked to be in her 30s, wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face. Next to her sat a small backpack, a blanket, and a battery-powered lantern. She'd been living here, in his loft, for God knew how long. "Who are you?" Michael managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "How did you get up here?" The woman raised her head, and in the glow of his phone light, he saw tears streaming down her cheeks. Her eyes held a desperation that made him pause. This wasn't some homeless stranger seeking shelter. Something else was happening here, something that made her shake with fear at the thought of police involvement. "My name is Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Holloway. Margaret was my grandmother." Michael pulled himself fully into the loft, keeping his distance but close enough to see Sarah clearly. The space was larger than he'd imagined, running the full length of the house with a peaked ceiling that allowed someone to stand in the center. Sarah had created a small living area in the corner farthest from the access hatch, where the roof sloped down to meet the floor. A sleeping bag lay neatly rolled beside the blanket, and several water bottles stood in a row against the wall. "Margaret Holloway died 3 years ago," Michael said carefully. "I bought this house from the estate. If you're her granddaughter, why didn't you inherit it? Why are you hiding in the loft of what's legally my home?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving smudges of dirt across her cheeks. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from weeks of poor sleep and constant anxiety. "Because according to the law, I don't exist," she said. "Or rather, I'm not supposed to exist anymore." Michael settled into a crouch, his knees protesting the awkward position. The loft felt airless despite the gaps in the roof tiles he could see above. "That doesn't make sense. Everyone exists. You're sitting right here." "6 years ago, I witnessed a murder," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was working late at a downtown office building, cleaning crew, nothing glamorous. I saw a man push another man off a balcony. 10th floor. The guy who fell, they said it was suicide, but I saw it happen. I saw the pusher's face. She paused, pulling her knees tighter against her chest. The man I saw was Victor Reeves. You might know the name. He owns half the commercial real estate in the city, sits on charity boards, donates to politicians. When I went to the police, they investigated. Victor had an alibi, security footage that supposedly showed him miles away. But I know what I saw. Michael's mind raced. He remembered the Reeves name from local news, always associated with ribbon cuttings and generous donations. So what happened? They threatened me, Sarah continued. Not Victor himself, but people who worked for him. Men in nice suits who knew where I lived, where my grandmother lived, what route I took to work. They said if I testified, my grandmother would have an accident. She was all I had left. My parents died when I was young. She raised me. The pieces were starting to fit together, though the picture they formed seemed impossible. You went into witness protection? Sarah laughed bitterly. I tried. But the case fell apart before it got to trial. The prosecutor said there wasn't enough evidence, that my testimony alone wouldn't be enough to convict someone like Victor Reeves. The witness protection program only takes you if you're testifying in an active case. I was left hanging, threatened and vulnerable, with no official help. She reached for one of the water bottles, taking a small sip. So I disappeared on my own. Changed my name, moved 3 states away, worked under the table. For 4 years, I stayed hidden. Then my grandmother got sick. Cancer. She didn't have long, and she wanted to see me. I took the risk. And Victor's people found you, Michael guessed. Not at first. I was careful. I visited her in the hospital using a visitor's badge under a fake name. I wore hats, glasses, changed my appearance. But someone must have recognized me or put things together. The day before she died, she told me about the loft. She'd had it finished years ago as a studio space, but never used it. There's an exterior access, a small door hidden behind the ivy on the north side of the house. She said if I ever needed to hide, truly hide, I should come here. Michael thought about the north side of the house, the wall covered in thick ivy that he'd never bothered to trim. He'd assumed it was just decorative, never imagining it concealed an entrance. Grandma died the next morning, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I couldn't go to the funeral. Too dangerous. But I came here that night, found the door just where she said it would be. I've been here ever since, moving carefully, only going out at night for supplies. I thought the house would stay empty for a while, give me time to figure out what to do next. Then you bought it. 3 years, Michael said, struggling to comprehend. You've been living in my loft for 3 years. Not continuously, Sarah admitted. I leave sometimes, stay other places, always moving. But this is my safe spot, the one place I can come back to when things get too dangerous. You're quiet, you work from home, you follow a routine. It made it easy to avoid you. Michael stood, needing to move despite the low ceiling. This was insane. A woman had been living above him, and he'd never known. Part of him wanted to call the police immediately, to end this bizarre situation. But the fear in Sarah's eyes stopped him. If her story was true, involving authorities might get her killed. I need proof, he said finally. I need to know you're telling the truth before I decide what to do. Sarah nodded slowly. I have documentation. Everything I could gather about Victor Reeves, about the murder, about the threats. It's all here. She pulled a weathered folder from her backpack. Look at it. Then decide if you believe me. Michael descended the ladder with the folder clutched in his hand, his mind spinning. Sarah remained in the loft, giving him space to process. He could hear her moving quietly above, the soft sounds that he'd been mistaking for house noises for months, maybe years. How many times had he attributed a creak or scrape to settling wood when it had actually been a woman trying to survive? In his study, he spread the folder's contents across his desk. The first document was a newspaper clipping from 6 years ago. Prominent developer dies in apparent suicide jump. The article was brief, mentioning that Thomas Brennan, a 42-year-old real estate developer, had fallen from the balcony of the Meridian Tower. Police found no signs of foul play. His business had been struggling, suggesting financial pressures. The case was closed within a week. Beneath the clipping, Michael found printed emails, their headers showing they'd been sent from an anonymous account. The messages were chilling in their simplicity. Drop this. Your grandmother's health is fragile. Accidents happen to old women. Each one was dated from the period when Sarah must have first gone to the police. There were photographs too, surveillance-style images of an elderly woman entering and leaving a small house that Michael recognized as being on the south side of town. Margaret Holloway, he assumed, going about her daily life while being watched. The implications made his stomach turn. The most damning evidence was a typed statement, notarized and dated 5 years ago, from a security guard named James Mitchell. In it, Mitchell claimed he'd been paid $5,000 to alter security footage on the night of Thomas Brennan's death. He described receiving the money from an intermediary, a man he later identified from photos as Victor Reeves's head of security. The statement ended with Mitchell's signature and a note, "I'm coming forward because I can't live with this anymore." A man died and the truth was buried. Michael searched his laptop for James Mitchell's name. It took only moments to find the obituary. Mitchell had died 4 years ago in a single-car accident, his vehicle leaving the road and striking a tree. No witnesses, no evidence of mechanical failure, closed as an accident. The pattern was becoming clear, and it terrified him. People connected to this case had a way of disappearing or dying. Thomas Brennan, pushed from a balcony. James Mitchell, dead in a convenient accident. Sarah, forced into hiding for 6 years. This wasn't paranoia or an overactive imagination. This was systematic elimination of threats to a powerful man. Michael climbed back up to the loft, finding Sarah sitting exactly where he'd left her. She looked at him expectantly, hope and fear warring in her expression. "James Mitchell is dead," Michael said. "I know. I tried to contact him 2 months after he gave that statement. That's when I found out about the accident." Sarah's voice was hollow. "He was going to testify if I could get the case reopened. He had copies of the original footage, before it was altered. After he died, I knew I couldn't trust anyone official. Victor Reeves has too much reach, too much money, too many connections." Michael sat down across from her, the folder between them like evidence at a trial. "Why stay here? Why not leave the city entirely, start over somewhere far away?" "Because running forever isn't living," Sarah said with quiet intensity. "I'm 34 years old. I can't have a real job, can't make real friends, can't use my own name. I exist in the margins, always looking over my shoulder. This isn't sustainable. Eventually, I'll slip up, or Victor's people will get lucky, or I'll just give up from exhaustion." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I stayed because I need to finish this. I need to find a way to bring Victor Reeves to justice, not just for Thomas Brennan, but for everyone else's hurt. For James Mitchell. For my grandmother, who died worried about my safety. I need to reclaim my life." "That's a death wish," Michael said bluntly. "You have some documents and a dead man's statement. That's not enough to bring down someone like Reeves. You'll just get yourself killed." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of hiding in attics and eating cold food and never seeing the sun except through gaps in roof tiles. If I'm going to die anyway, I'd rather die fighting than die hiding." Her words hung in the air between them. Michael thought about his own life, the comfortable routines he'd built, the safety he took for granted. He'd never had to run from anything more threatening than a demanding deadline. The idea of living like Sarah, constantly afraid, constantly moving, was incomprehensible. "I won't call the police," he said finally. "But I can't just let you keep living in my loft indefinitely. That's not fair to either of us." Relief washed over Sarah's face, followed quickly by wariness. "So what do you want?" "I want to help you figure this out," Michael said, surprising himself with the words even as he spoke them. "I'm a data analyst. I find patterns, connections, things that don't fit. If there's a way to build a case against Victor Reeves that doesn't get you killed, maybe we can find it together." Sarah stared at him as if he'd offered her the moon. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. This isn't your problem." Michael thought about that. She was right. He could easily tell her to leave, wash his hands of the whole situation, go back to his quiet life. But something about the injustice of it all, the idea of a murderer walking free while his victim lived like a ghost, stirred something in him he didn't know was there. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no one should have to live like this." The partnership began cautiously. Michael set up a proper space for Sarah in the spare bedroom, insisting she couldn't continue living in the loft. She was hesitant at first, worried about being visible through windows or leaving traces that could be noticed. But the promise of a real bed and regular meals eventually won out over paranoia. They established rules. Sarah would stay inside during the day, away from windows. She'd use a prepaid phone Michael bought, never her old contacts. They'd research Victor Reeves methodically, building a timeline of his business dealings and relationships that might reveal patterns or vulnerabilities. Michael discovered that Sarah had understated her own skills. She wasn't just a former cleaning crew worker. She'd been 2 semesters away from a degree in criminal justice when everything fell apart. Her understanding of evidence, legal procedures, and investigative techniques proved invaluable. "We need to find the original security footage," Sarah said on their 3rd night working together. They'd converted Michael's dining room into a command center, walls covered with printed documents and timeline charts. James Mitchell said he had copies. If those exist somewhere, they'd prove Victor was at the Meridian Tower that night. Mitchell died 4 years ago, Michael pointed out. Anything he had would be long gone by now. Not necessarily. Sarah pulled up a list of storage facilities on her laptop. People keep things. Family members don't always know what's important. If Mitchell had a storage unit, his belongings might still be there. It took 2 days of careful searching through public records to find what they needed. James Mitchell had rented a unit at Secure Space Storage on the east side of town. The rental was still active, the bills being paid from Mitchell's estate account, which his sister managed. "How do we access it?" Michael asked. "We can't exactly explain why we need to search a dead man's storage unit." Sarah smiled grimly. "We don't explain. We go at night, when the facility is closed, and we find a way in." The plan made Michael's heart race with anxiety, but he couldn't argue with the logic. This wasn't the kind of information they could request through official channels. They were investigating a murder that the authorities had declared a suicide, chasing evidence that powerful people wanted to stay buried. They spent a week preparing. Michael visited the storage facility during business hours, pretending to inquire about renting a unit. He took note of the security cameras, the lock systems, the patrol schedule of the single night guard. Sarah studied the building's layout online, identifying potential entry points and escape routes. On a moonless Thursday night, they put their plan into action. Michael drove past the facility twice, confirming the guard was making his rounds on schedule. Sarah, dressed in dark clothes with her hair tucked under a cap, slipped over the chain-link fence at a blind spot between cameras. Michael's job was to wait in the car, ready to create a distraction if needed. 20 minutes passed like hours. Michael watched the guard's office, his phone in his hand, prepared to call in a noise complaint at a nearby address if Sarah was discovered. But the guard remained inside, visible through the lighted window, apparently absorbed in his phone. Sarah emerged from the shadows so quietly that Michael jumped when she appeared at the passenger door. She slid into the seat, breathing hard, a small cardboard box clutched in her arms. "Drive," she said. "Don't speed, don't do anything to get noticed. Just drive normally." Michael pulled away from the curb, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. "Did you find it?" "I found something," Sarah said. "I won't know what until we get home and I can look through it properly." Back at the house, they spread the box's contents on the dining room table. There were personal effects, photos of Mitchell with family, letters from a daughter, military medals from his service. And beneath those, wrapped in a plastic bag, were 3 USB drives. Sarah plugged the first drive into her laptop, her hands shaking. The drive contained video files, each labeled with a date and time. She clicked on the file dated the night of Thomas Brennan's death. The video was grainy, the angle awkward, but it clearly showed the 10th floor balcony of the Meridian Tower. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then 2 figures emerged onto the balcony. Even in the poor quality footage, their body language spoke of confrontation. One man gestured angrily. The other stepped back, hands raised placatingly. The confrontation escalated quickly. The angry man lunged forward, grabbing the other by the shoulders. There was a brief struggle, and then the second man went over the railing, his arms pinwheeling in a futile attempt to catch himself. The killer stood at the railing for a moment, looking down at what he'd done. Then he turned, and the camera caught his face clearly. Victor Reeves, recognizable even in the low-quality footage, his expression cold and calculating. Sarah made a sound between a gasp and a sob. "This is it. This is what James Mitchell saved. The original footage before it was altered." Michael stared at the screen, watching as Victor Reeves straightened his jacket and walked calmly back inside, a murderer caught on camera. "This changes everything." "It changes nothing if we can't get it to the right people," Sarah said. "Victor has corrupted the local police investigation before. We need to go higher, federal level, somewhere his influence doesn't reach." They spent the rest of the night researching, identifying FBI field officers and Justice Department contacts who specialized in corruption cases. They needed someone who couldn't be bought, someone with the authority to act on what they'd found. By dawn, they had a plan. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was the best chance they had. Sarah would make copies of everything, storing them in multiple secure locations. Michael would reach out to a federal prosecutor he found through his research, someone with a reputation for taking on powerful defendants. Once we do this, there's no going back, Michael said as the sun began to rise. Victor will know someone's coming for him. Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much fear for someone so young. I've been gone for 6 years already. It's time to come back. The federal prosecutor's name was Rebecca Torres, and her reputation preceded her. She'd brought down corrupt politicians, organized crime figures, and corporate executives who thought themselves untouchable. When Michael called her office, he half expected to be dismissed. Instead, he was transferred 3 times before finally reaching Torres herself. I need to see the evidence before I commit to anything, Torres said over the phone, her voice crisp and professional. If what you're describing is real, it's significant. But I've been promised smoking guns before, only to find shadows and speculation. Michael arranged a meeting for the following Tuesday at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where they could speak freely. Sarah wanted to come, but Michael convinced her to stay hidden. If Victor's people were watching Torres, which seemed likely given her profile, Sarah couldn't risk being seen. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Michael jumped at every unexpected sound, examined every car that parked on their street, second-guessed every decision. Sarah was calmer, or at least better at hiding her anxiety. She spent hours reviewing the evidence, anticipating questions Torres might ask, preparing documentation that would withstand legal scrutiny. On Tuesday morning, Michael dressed carefully in his best suit, trying to look like someone who should be taken seriously. He carried a laptop bag containing copies of everything: the video footage, James Mitchell's statement, the threatening emails, the timeline they'd constructed of Victor Reeves's activities. Rebecca Torres was younger than Michael expected, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat in the back corner of the coffee shop, her own laptop already open, a mostly empty cup of coffee at her elbow. "Mr. Chen," she said, shaking his hand with a firm grip. "You have 15 minutes to convince me this is worth my time." Michael opened the laptop and turned it so she could see the screen. He didn't say anything, just pressed play on the video file. Torres watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When the video ended with Victor Reeves walking away from the balcony, she leaned back in her chair. "Where did you get this?" "From James Mitchell, the security guard who was paid to alter the footage. He kept the originals." Michael launched into the full story, speaking quickly but clearly, covering Sarah's witnessing of the crime, the threats, Mitchell's death, everything they'd uncovered. Torres listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her laptop. When Michael finished, she sat quietly for a moment, processing. "This is substantial," she said finally. "The video alone would be enough to reopen the investigation. Combined with Mitchell's statement and the pattern of intimidation, we could build a strong case. But I need to verify everything independently." "How long will that take?" Michael asked. "Weeks, maybe months. I need to confirm Mitchell's death wasn't actually an accident, track down the intermediary who paid him off, verify the authenticity of the video, build a timeline that doesn't rely solely on your witness's testimony." Torres closed her laptop. "And I need to meet this witness. I can't move forward without interviewing her directly." Michael had expected this but dreaded it nonetheless. Bringing Sarah into the open, even to meet with a federal prosecutor, felt dangerous. "She's afraid. Victor Reeves has been hunting her for 6 years." "I understand, but I can't prosecute a case based on an anonymous witness," Torres said firmly. "If she wants justice, she needs to be willing to testify. I can offer her protection, actual witness protection through the federal program, but she has to be willing to come forward." That evening, Michael presented Torres's offer to Sarah. They sat in the living room, the space that had become their war room, evidence still taped to the walls like wallpaper made of accusations. "Federal witness protection," Sarah repeated, testing the words. "That's what I tried to get 6 years ago and couldn't." "You have leverage now," Michael pointed out. "You have evidence they need." Torres seemed committed, like she really wants to bring Reeves down. Sarah walked to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the street below. Dusk was settling over the neighborhood, familiar houses glowing with warm light, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Everything she'd lost and spent 6 years trying to reclaim. "If I do this, I'll have to testify," she said quietly. "I'll have to sit in a courtroom and look Victor Reeves in the eye while lawyers try to discredit me. They'll dig into every part of my life, question every decision I've made. It will be brutal." "It will," Michael agreed. "But it will also be public. Reeves can't make you disappear if everyone is watching. And when it's over, if we win, you'll be free. Really free." Sarah turned from the window, and in the dimming light, Michael saw the determination that had kept her alive through 6 years of running. "Set up the meeting. I'll talk to Torres." The meeting happened 3 days later in Torres's office, a secure federal building with metal detectors and armed guards. Sarah was terrified, certain that walking into an official building would somehow alert Victor's people, but Torres had arranged everything carefully. They entered through a private entrance, took a secure elevator, met in a room with no windows. Torres interviewed Sarah for 4 hours, recording everything, asking detailed questions about the night of the murder, the threats, her years in hiding. She was thorough but not unkind, and by the end, Sarah looked exhausted but also lighter, as if sharing the burden had freed something inside her. "I'm going to recommend you for witness protection," Torres said as the interview concluded. "While we build the case, you'll be relocated to a secure location. New identity, new life, but this time backed by federal resources. You won't be alone." "What about Michael?" Sarah asked. "He helped me. If Reeves finds out, he could be in danger." Torres looked at Michael, her expression serious. "Mr. Chen, you've involved yourself in something significant. I can offer you limited protection, but you're not the witness. The best I can do is advise you to be careful." Michael nodded, understanding the limitations. He'd made his choice when he decided to help Sarah, knowing the risks. "I'll be fine." The following weeks moved with agonizing slowness. Sarah was moved to a safe house while Torres's team worked to verify the evidence and build their case. Michael returned to his normal routine, or tried to, but the house felt empty without her. He'd gotten used to having someone to talk to, someone to share meals with, someone who understood what they were fighting for. 2 months after meeting Torres, Michael received a call. The grand jury had returned an indictment against Victor Reeves for the murder of Thomas Brennan and associated charges of obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. The arrest had been made that morning, Reeves taken into custody without incident. The trial took place 6 months later. Michael attended every day, sitting in the public gallery watching as prosecutors methodically presented their case. Sarah testified for 3 days, calm and credible, detailing what she'd seen and what she'd endured. The defense lawyers tried to break her, suggesting she was mistaken, that she was seeking attention or money, that her years in hiding proved mental instability rather than genuine fear. But the video footage was undeniable. Experts testified to its authenticity. Financial records showed the payments made to James Mitchell and others. Former employees of Reeves, granted immunity, testified about a pattern of intimidation and violence against anyone who threatened the empire he'd built. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Michael watched Victor Reeves's face as the verdict was read, seeing the cold calculation replaced by shocked disbelief. A man who thought himself above the law, brought down by a woman he'd tried to erase and a security guard who'd saved the truth on a USB drive. After the trial, after Reeves was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, Sarah met Michael at a small restaurant across from the courthouse. She looked different, wearing her own name like new clothes that didn't quite fit yet, but she was smiling. "I can go anywhere now," she said, wonder in her voice. "I can use my real name, get a real job, make real friends. I can live." "What will you do?" Michael asked. "Finish my degree," Sarah said immediately. "Criminal justice. Maybe become a victim's advocate, help other people who find themselves in impossible situations. Use what I learned to make something good come from all this." They talked for hours, about the trial, about the future, about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. When they finally said goodbye, it felt both like an ending and a beginning. Michael returned to his house on Maple Street, the Victorian that had harbored secrets in its loft and witnessed an unlikely alliance. He climbed the stairs to the loft one final time, looking at the space where Sarah had hidden, where she'd made the decision to fight back rather than keep running. The loft was empty now, cleaned out and silent. But standing there, Michael didn't feel the emptiness as absence. He felt it as potential, as proof that people could survive impossible things and come out stronger. That justice, though sometimes slow and difficult, was possible when people refused to give up. He closed the loft hatch and went downstairs to his study, ready to return to his ordinary life, knowing now that ordinary didn't mean meaningless. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was hear a sound in the loft and choose to investigate rather than ignore it. Sometimes the most heroic act was simply refusing to look away.